The day Viola Fairchild first met Prince Nikolai Ivanov, she was kneeling in mud, her apron soaked through, and her hands trembling as she tried to stop the bleeding of a stable boy who had been kicked in the chest by a startled horse. "Press harder here," she instructed her assistant, a young girl from the village who had come to learn the healing arts. "The bleeding won't stop unless you apply proper pressure." She didn't notice the shadow falling over them until a deep voice spoke. "You're doing it wrong." Viola looked up, squinting against the spring sunlight that silhouetted the tall figure. "I beg your pardon." The man knelt beside her in one fluid motion, his fine wool coat brushing the mud without hesitation. "The wound is too close to the heart. You need to elevate his legs and apply pressure here." His fingers, adorned with only a single gold signet ring, pressed firmly at a point just below the boy's collarbone. The bleeding slowed almost immediately. Viola stared, first at the wounded boy, then at the stranger's face. High cheekbones, a straight nose, and piercing grey eyes that reminded her of the Baltic Sea during winter. His dark hair was cut short in the military style that had become fashionable in Niova after the Great War. "Thank you," she said simply, returning her attention to her patient. "Thomas, fetch the stretcher. We need to move him to the infirmary." Only when they had the boy safely inside did Viola turn back to thank the stranger properly, but he was gone. She asked the stable master later who the gentleman had been. "Gentleman," the old man had laughed. "That was His Royal Highness, Prince Nikolai. Crown Prince of all Niova, girl. He's just returned from his medical studies in Vienna." Viola had felt the blood drain from her face. She had addressed the heir to the throne as if he were a common physician. "Don't worry yourself," the stable master added, seeing her expression. "The prince is known for his unusual interests. The old emperor calls them his grandson's common fascinations." That night, as Viola washed the day's grime from her hands in the small cottage she shared with her elderly father on the edge of the palace grounds, she couldn't forget those grey eyes. Not because they belonged to royalty, though that was shocking enough, but because they had looked at her as an equal. As someone worth kneeling in the mud beside. It was a dangerous thought for the daughter of the palace gardener to entertain. 3 weeks passed before Viola saw the prince again. She was tending the medicinal herb garden her father had allowed her to plant in a secluded corner of the palace grounds when she heard footsteps on the gravel path. "I've been told this is where the palace's unofficial healer grows her remedies." She stood quickly, nearly dropping her basket of freshly cut lavender. "Your Highness." Prince Nikolai wore a simple riding coat despite the formality that usually accompanied members of the royal family. His eyes swept over the neat rows of herbs. "Impressive. Did you learn this from your father?" "Some, Your Highness. My mother was a village healer before she married. I learned much from her journals after she passed." "And the rest?" Viola hesitated. Women were not officially admitted to the Royal Medical Academy. "I borrow books from the palace physician when he can spare them." A smile touched the prince's lips. "Borrow? Or do they mysteriously disappear and reappear with the same mysterious regularity?" Heat flushed her cheeks. "I always return them in better condition than I found them, Your Highness." "I don't doubt it." He picked a sprig of rosemary, rubbing it between his fingers and inhaling the scent. "The stable boy, Petter, he's recovering well. Your quick action saved his life." "Your intervention saved it, Your Highness." "Nikolai," he said unexpectedly. "When we speak of medicine, I would prefer you call me Nikolai. Titles create unnecessary distance between healers." Viola stared at him, uncertain if this was some kind of test. That would be highly improper. So is a woman practicing medicine without formal training, yet here we are. His eyes held no mockery. "I've seen your notes in the margins of Gersman's Anatomy of the Human Body. Your observations on the lymphatic system are more accurate than the original text." She nearly dropped her basket again. "You've read my, Dr. Leonov showed me." He's quite impressed, though he'd never admit it publicly. The prince hesitated, then spoke with careful precision. "I'm establishing a research project on traditional healing methods. The war showed us that modern medicine still has much to learn. I could use someone with your knowledge of herbal remedies. Viola's heart pounded. To work with actual physicians, to have access to real medical texts and instruments, it was everything she had ever dreamed of. I would be honored, Your Highness, she caught herself. Nikolai. But the medical society would never accept. Let me worry about the medical society. He smiled again, and this time it transformed his face, softening the aristocratic features into something almost boyish. Meet me in the East Wing Library tomorrow afternoon. Bring your notes. As he walked away, Viola stood frozen among her herbs, wondering if she had imagined the entire encounter. He's using you, said Thomas, the young assistant physician, as they arranged supplies in the palace infirmary the next morning. The prince has always had eccentric ideas. Once he's gathered whatever folk remedies he finds interesting, you'll be sent back to picking flowers. Viola carefully labeled a jar of willow bark tincture. Perhaps. But even a few weeks working with actual medical texts would be worth it. Thomas snorted. Listen to yourself. The gardener's daughter working alongside the crown prince? The court will eat you alive. His voice softened. I'm saying this as your friend, Viola. People like us don't mix with royalty without getting burned. It's a research project, Thomas, not a royal ball. But his words had planted a seed of doubt. Besides, what choice do I have? This may be my only chance to practice real medicine. When she entered the East Wing Library that afternoon, Viola half expected to find it empty, the prince having forgotten his impulsive invitation. Instead, she found not only Prince Nikolai but 3 other men in formal academic robes. Gentlemen, this is Miss Fairchild, the prince said without preamble. She'll be documenting our comparative study of traditional remedies. The oldest of the men, whom Viola recognized as Dr. Sokolov, the head of the Royal Medical Academy, looked her up and down with barely concealed disdain. A woman? And not even a noble woman at that. Your Highness, this is highly irregular. So is losing 20,000 soldiers to infections we couldn't treat, Nikolai replied evenly. Miss Fairchild's knowledge of medicinal plants exceeds anyone's at the Academy. Unless you'd prefer I invite the Romani healers from the southern provinces instead. The threat of bringing in those the aristocracy considered even less desirable had the desired effect. Dr. Sokolov gave a stiff bow. As your Highness wishes. But she will only be permitted to observe and take notes. No direct participation in experiments. After they left, Viola turned to the prince. You didn't tell me I'd be meeting the entire medical council. Would you have come if I had? Nikolai gestured to a table covered with books and papers. I needed them to see you before they could dismiss you. Now, shall we begin? I'm particularly interested in your use of honey for wound treatment. For the next 3 hours, they worked side by side, Viola gradually forgetting her nervousness as they discussed medical theories. The prince was surprisingly knowledgeable, asking questions that challenged her understanding and offering insights from his formal training. You would have made an excellent physician, she said without thinking, then immediately regretted her familiarity. But Nikolai only smiled. Perhaps in another life. In this one, I have other duties awaiting me. A shadow crossed his face. The Emperor's health is failing. I may soon have responsibilities that leave little time for medical research. I'm sorry, Viola said quietly. Both for His Imperial Majesty and for you. Why for me? Because you love this work. It's clear in every question you ask. She hesitated. It seems a shame to give it up for, well, for a crown. The prince's laugh held little humor. You're more perceptive than most of the court, Miss Fairchild. Viola, she said impulsively. If I'm to call you Nikolai when we speak of medicine, then you should call me Viola. Their eyes met across the table, and something shifted in the air between them, a recognition, perhaps, of 2 souls who understood what it meant to be caught between worlds. The library door opened abruptly. Princess Katerina, Nikolai's younger sister, swept in wearing a riding habit, her blonde hair escaping its pins. She stopped short at the sight of Viola. Nikki, there you are. Mother's been, oh. I didn't realize you had company. The change in the prince was immediate. His posture straightened, his expression becoming carefully neutral. Katerina, this is Miss Fairchild. She's assisting with my medical research. The princess's eyes narrowed as she took in Viola's simple dress and work-worn hands. The gardener's daughter? How novel. She turned back to her brother. Mother requires your presence. The Belgradian ambassador has arrived early, along with his daughter. Something unspoken passed between the royal siblings. Nikolai gathered his papers. We'll continue tomorrow, Miss Fairchild. Please review the texts I've marked. After they left, Viola remained seated, a strange hollowness forming in her chest. Thomas's words echoed in her mind, people like us don't mix with royalty without getting burned. She hadn't realized until that moment how easily she could be consumed by the flame. The summer passed in a rhythm Viola had never imagined possible. 3 afternoons each week, she worked alongside Prince Nikolai in the library or the small laboratory he had established in a disused conservatory. Their research began to yield results, a honey and herb mixture that prevented infection in wounds, a bark extract that reduced fevers more effectively than imported quinine. The rest of her time was spent in her father's gardens or the village infirmary, where she applied their findings to real patients. Dr. Sokolov and the other physicians gradually moved from contempt to grudging acceptance of her presence, though they still addressed their questions to the prince rather than directly to her. Only in the privacy of the laboratory did the walls between their stations dissolve. There, they were simply Nikolai and Viola, 2 minds united in purpose. You're frowning, Nikolai observed one autumn afternoon as Viola measured ingredients for their newest experiment. What troubles you? This preparation isn't right, she murmured, focused on the mortar and pestle in her hands. The proportions in the ancient text must be mistranslated. It's too thick to be absorbed properly. You have remarkable instincts, he said, coming to stand beside her. What would you suggest instead? She glanced up, startled by his proximity. The laboratory was small, and his tall frame seemed to fill the space beside her. I would add more of the alcohol base. And perhaps substitute rose oil for the animal fat. Try it, he encouraged, his eyes warm with interest. As she worked, Viola became acutely aware of him watching her hands. His own hands were unusual for a prince, strong and capable, with calluses from riding and fencing, and a small scar across one knuckle from their early laboratory work. Hands that had saved the stable boy's life and now worked alongside hers to heal others. There, she said finally, presenting the modified salve. It should penetrate deeper into the inflamed tissues now. He took the jar from her, their fingers brushing briefly. The contact sent an unexpected warmth up her arm. Nikolai seemed to feel it too. He paused, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. The moment stretched between them, taut with unspoken possibility. Then the laboratory door opened, and Lady Elise Vandenberg, daughter of the Interior Minister and one of Princess Katerina's ladies-in-waiting, entered with a rustle of expensive silk. Your Highness, she curtsied elegantly before casting a dismissive glance at Viola. Princess Katerina sent me to remind you of the state dinner this evening. The Belgradian delegation will be attending. Thank you, Lady Elise. I hadn't forgotten. Nikolai's voice had reverted to its public cadence, polite, distant, royal. Lady Helena will be delighted, Lady Elise continued, watching Viola from the corner of her eye. She's been inconsolable since your hunting party was cancelled last week. Viola busied herself with cleaning equipment, trying to appear deaf to the conversation while acutely aware of every word. Lady Helena Markov was the Belgradian ambassador's daughter, beautiful, accomplished, and from one of the oldest noble families in the neighboring kingdom. Rumors of a potential alliance between her and Prince Nikolai had circulated through the palace for months. Please inform my sister I'll be there shortly, Nikolai said, a clear dismissal. After Lady Elise departed, an uncomfortable silence filled the laboratory. Viola continued cleaning, her movements mechanical. Viola, Nikolai began, his voice returning to the warmer tone he used only with her. The court has its own rhythm and expectations. They can be relentless. You don't owe me explanations, Your Highness. She winced at her own formality. Don't I? He moved closer, lowering his voice. These past months working with you have been the most meaningful of my life. You must know that. She looked up at him, allowing herself one moment of complete honesty. And you must know that whatever this is between us can't continue. You're the crown prince. I'm the gardener's daughter. The whole palace already whispers about your common fascination. Pain flashed across his features. Is that what you think this is? What else could it be? She placed the last clean vial in its holder, removing her apron. I should go. My father will be expecting me. As she reached the door, Nikolai called after her. Tomorrow. The eastern meadow at sunrise. There's a plant I need to show you, potential cardiac properties. For our research. Viola hesitated, then nodded once before slipping away. That night, she lay awake in her small bed, listening to her father's gentle snoring from the next room. The cottage that had always been her sanctuary now felt like a cage. Every book on her shelf, every dried herb hanging from the rafters, reminded her of the prince. Of a world she had glimpsed but could never truly enter. Yet when dawn broke, she found herself walking toward the eastern meadow, drawn by a force stronger than reason. The morning mist still clung to the ground when Viola reached the meadow. Nikolai was already there, not in his usual formal attire but in a simple riding coat and boots. No attendants, no royal guards. Just a man waiting in the dawn light. I wasn't sure you'd come, he said as she approached. You mentioned cardiac properties. That's too important to ignore. Her attempt at professional detachment sounded hollow even to her own ears. He smiled, seeing through the pretense. There is indeed a plant I want to show you, but I confess it was also an excuse. He gestured to a small blanket spread on a dry patch of ground, where a basket sat today. I brought breakfast. This is inappropriate, she said, even as she moved toward the blanket. Extremely, he agreed, helping her sit. Which is why we're meeting at an hour when the court is still abed, in a meadow visible from 3 guard towers. My protection detail is currently pretending to be very interested in a stand of trees 200 yards away. Despite herself, Viola laughed. You've thought this through. I've thought of little else. He opened the basket, revealing fresh bread, cheese, and early apples. As they ate, he pointed out the plant he'd mentioned, a rare type of foxglove with promising properties for treating heart ailments. When they had finished their simple meal, Nikolai reached into his pocket and withdrew a small leather-bound book. I have something for you. Viola took it carefully, opening to the first page. Paracelsus's Great Surgery book? But this is nearly impossible to find. How did you? The Royal Library had 2 copies. This one will not be missed. His eyes were serious now. Viola, I need to tell you something. In 3 days, there will be an announcement at court. The peace of the morning shattered. She knew what was coming. Your engagement to Lady Helena. No. He took her hands in his. My expedition to the northern provinces. There's been an outbreak of fever in the mining communities. The Imperial Council wants to send physicians, but I've insisted on going myself. To implement our treatments. Viola stared at him. The northern provinces? But it's nearly winter. The mountain passes will soon be impassable. Which is why I must leave immediately. I'll be gone until spring. His grip on her hands tightened. Come with me. What? Come with me, he repeated. Your knowledge of herbal remedies would be invaluable. The mining communities have their own healing traditions that could further our research. It would be perfectly respectable, you be part of the medical team, with your own quarters and attendants. She pulled her hands away. Respectable? The crown prince traveling with the gardener's daughter for months in the remote provinces? The court would never allow it. The emperor has approved it. Nikolai's expression was determined. He's impressed with our results. And he understands certain things about duty and the heart that others do not. What are you saying? I'm saying that I need these months away from court. Away from expectations and arrangements being made without my consent. I need time, Viola. His voice dropped. Time with you, without the palace walls between us. Hope, dangerous and fragile, unfurled in her chest. Even if I went, nothing fundamental would change. You would still return to court, to your duties. To the alliances your family needs. Perhaps. His gaze held hers. Or perhaps, by spring, we will have found another path. Will you come? The sun had fully risen now, burning away the mist. In its clear light, Viola saw the man before her, not the crown prince, but Nikolai, with his passion for healing and his quiet rebellion against the constraints of his birth. Yes, she whispered, knowing she was stepping off a cliff into the unknown. I'll come. The northern provinces of Niova were a world apart from the refined capital. Rugged mountains rose like sentinels around isolated valleys where villages huddled against the coming winter. The people were hardy and suspicious of outsiders, especially those from the imperial court. But illness recognized no social boundaries. The fever had already claimed dozens of lives in the mining communities, and desperation made even the most reluctant villagers seek help from the royal expedition. Viola found herself working longer hours than ever before. The mountain healers, mostly women with knowledge passed down through generations, initially regarded her with the same suspicion they showed the court physicians. But when they saw her willingness to learn their methods rather than simply impose her own, a tentative alliance formed. You have a gift, Marta, an elderly healer, told Viola one evening as they prepared poultices together. You listen to the plants, to the body. Not like those city doctors with their Latin words and bleeding cups. They have knowledge too, Viola defended her colleagues. Different approaches can complement each other. Marta's wrinkled face creased in a knowing smile. Is that why the prince watches you when you work? For complementary knowledge. Heat flooded Viola's cheeks. His Highness values all perspectives on healing. His Highness values more than your medicine, child. The old woman tied off a bundle of dried leaves. I've seen how royal men look at common women. Usually, it's hunger without respect. He looks at you differently. Viola focused intently on grinding herbs in her mortar. Whatever you think you see cannot matter. We come from different worlds. Marta seemed unconvinced. In the mountains, we believe the heart knows its match regardless of what village they were born in. Even royalty are human beneath their fine clothes. That night, as snow fell heavily outside the stone lodge that served as their medical headquarters, Viola found herself alone with Nikolai for the first time in weeks. Their work had kept them surrounded by others, patients, physicians, local healers, leaving little opportunity for private conversation. She was inventorying their medicine stores when he entered the small storeroom, a lantern in hand. You should be resting, he said. You've been working since dawn. As have you. She continued counting vials of tincture. The new cases in the eastern village need these preparations by morning. Nikolai set down his lantern and gently took the inventory list from her hands. The others can finish this. You're exhausted. She was too tired to maintain the professional distance she had carefully cultivated during their expedition. I'm afraid to stop. When I stop, I think too much. About what? About how temporary this is. She gestured vaguely around them. This work, this freedom to practice medicine openly, this equality between us. When we return to the capital, everything changes back. Nikolai was silent for a long moment. Does it have to? You know it does. She finally looked directly at him, allowing her fatigue to strip away her usual caution. Court life has no place for someone like me except as a curiosity, the common girl who knows about plants. And you'll have duties waiting. Alliances to cement. A suitable royal bride to find. And if I've already found the woman I want? His voice was barely above a whisper. The air between them seemed to still. Outside, the wind drove snow against the windows, but in the small storeroom, time suspended. "Don't," she said, her voice breaking. "Please don't say things that can only bring pain later. Viola." He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "These months here, seeing you work, watching how these people respond to you, it's only confirmed what I already knew in the palace. You are extraordinary. Not despite your background, but because of it. Extraordinary or not, I'm still the gardener's daughter." She tried to step back, but found herself against the shelves. "And I'm still the crown prince. Neither of us chose our birth." His hand rose to her face, hovering near her cheek without quite touching. "But I can choose who stands beside me when I take the throne." Her breath caught. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that the world is changing. The old empires fell during the war. New ideas are reshaping what monarchy means." His eyes held a fervent intensity. "My grandfather understands this. It's why he approved this expedition, why he's allowed our research to continue despite the medical council's objections. The emperor approves of us." She couldn't quite bring herself to define what us meant. "He approves of me finding my own path. He married for alliance and spent 50 years in a cordial but empty marriage. Before I left, he told me not to make the same mistake." Nikolai finally allowed his fingers to brush her cheek. "There will be opposition. The court, the council, even some of the public. But if you would stand with me." The touch of his hand against her skin broke something inside her, the careful wall she had built between her heart and her hopes. "You know I would. But the cost to you is nothing compared to the cost of losing you." And then he was kissing her, his lips warm and certain against hers. Viola's resolve crumbled entirely. She kissed him back, her hands finding their way to his shoulders, feeling the solid reality of him. This was no fantasy, no impossible dream. This was Nikolai, holding her as if she were precious beyond measure. When they finally broke apart, breathless, the world seemed altered. Irrevocably changed by the truth they had finally acknowledged. "There will be no announcement of any engagement when we return," Nikolai said, his forehead resting against hers. "Only a continuation of our medical research, officially. And privately, we will find our way forward. Together." Outside, the storm raged. But within the small storeroom, a different kind of tempest had passed, leaving in its wake a fragile, newborn hope. Spring arrived late in the mountains but early at court. By the time the royal expedition began its journey back to the capital, rumors had already spread through the palace. Princess Katerina's letters to her brother grew increasingly alarmed. "The Belgradian ambassador is insulted by your extended absence," she wrote. "Lady Helena's family has begun entertaining other suitors. Mother is beside herself with worry about your intentions. And there are whispers, Nikki. Unsavory whispers about you and the gardener's girl." Nikolai shared the letter with Viola as their carriage wound through the foothills toward the capital. Katerina means well, but she sees the world only through the lens of court politics. Viola folded the letter carefully. "She's not wrong about the whispers. They'll only grow louder when we return. Let them." He took her hand. "Our work in the northern provinces saved hundreds of lives. The new treatments we developed with the mountain healers have been documented and can be replicated. No one can deny our accomplishments. It's not our work they'll object to." She looked out at the greening landscape. "It's us." The journey back seemed to pass too quickly. With each mile, Viola felt the weight of court expectations settling back onto her shoulders. By the time the capital spires appeared on the horizon, her stomach was a knot of anxiety. They were met at the palace gates by a formal reception, the emperor himself, frail but standing, Princess Katerina, and various ministers and courtiers. Viola immediately stepped back, taking her place with the physicians and other expedition members rather than at Nikolai's side. The message was clear: the interlude of equality in the mountains was over. The following days confirmed her fears. While their medical findings were received with enthusiasm, particularly after the northern governor sent effusive reports of the lives saved. Viola found herself increasingly isolated. Court physicians who had worked alongside her in the mountains now barely acknowledged her in palace corridors. Whispers followed her through the gardens. Even her father noticed. "People are talking, Viola," he said one evening as they sat in their cottage. "The palace steward asked me yesterday if you had ambitions above your station." She stared into the small fire. "And what did you tell him?" "That my daughter has always had more sense than the entire court combined." He studied her face. "But I wonder if that's still true. Your heart seems to be leading you into dangerous territory." "I never asked for this," she whispered. "I only wanted to heal people." Her father's weathered hand covered hers. "The heart doesn't ask permission before it chooses." "But Viola, the distance between your world and his—" "I know the distance," she interrupted, unable to bear another reminder of what couldn't be. "Better than anyone." 3 weeks after their return, Viola was summoned to the emperor's private study. She entered trembling, certain she was about to be dismissed from the palace entirely. Emperor Mikhail was alone, seated near a window overlooking the gardens her father had tended for decades. Age had bent his once imposing frame, but his eyes remained sharp and assessing. "Miss Fairchild," he acknowledged her curtsy. "I've been reading the reports from the northern provinces. Remarkable work." "Thank you, Your Imperial Majesty. The credit belongs to the entire expedition." He gestured to a chair. "Sit. My neck hurts from looking up at people these days." She perched on the edge of the seat, hands folded tightly in her lap. "My grandson has always been unconventional," the emperor continued. Even as a child, he preferred the company of the palace physicians to his young noble companions. His interest in medicine concerned his parents, but I encouraged it. A modern monarch needs to understand the lives of all his subjects, not just those born to privilege. Viola remained silent, uncertain where this was leading. "He tells me he intends to marry you." The blunt statement nearly caused her to fall from her chair. "Your Majesty, I never presumed, of course you didn't." "That's precisely why he loves you." The old man's eyes twinkled unexpectedly. "Oh, don't look so shocked. I'm old, not blind. I've watched you both since you returned. He's never looked at anyone the way he looks at you." "It's impossible," she whispered. "The court would never accept it. The court adapts to the monarch's will, not the other way around." The emperor tapped his fingers against the arm of his chair. "There would be challenges, certainly. Opposition from the old families. Perhaps even threats to the stability of the succession. But Nikolai believes you are worth those risks." "And what does your Majesty believe?" "I believe that in my long life, I've learned one immutable truth: a ruler who sacrifices personal happiness for political expedience becomes a bitter, ineffective monarch." He leaned forward slightly. "I married a woman I'd met twice before our wedding day. She was appropriate in every way: bloodline, education, deportment. We produced heirs and ruled effectively. But there was never joy between us, never that spark that makes life worth the burden of a crown." Viola could hardly believe she was having this conversation with the Emperor of Niova. "My grandson faces a different world than I did," he continued. "The old empires are gone. Divine right no longer commands the loyalty it once did. To survive, monarchy must evolve, become more connected to the people it serves." He studied her face. A queen who has known hard work and struggle might be exactly what Niova needs. "Queen." The word felt foreign on her tongue. "Your Majesty, I'm a healer, not a, you're both." The emperor's voice grew firmer. "The question is whether you love my grandson enough to become more than you ever imagined being." Before she could answer, there was a knock, and Prince Nikolai entered. He stopped short at the sight of Viola. "Grandfather? I was told you wanted to see me." "Indeed." The emperor smiled slightly. "I was just having an enlightening conversation with Miss Fairchild about the future of the monarchy." Nikolai's eyes moved between them, concern evident on his face. I had hoped to speak with you first about certain matters. You've spoken enough. Now it's time for action. The Emperor waved a dismissive hand. The summer ball is in 3 weeks. Make your intentions clear then, before the entire court. No more hiding in laboratories and mountain villages. After they were dismissed, Nikolai led Viola to the small herb garden where they had first spoken of medicine nearly a year before. The evening air was heavy with the scent of early summer blooms. What did he say to you? Nikolai asked, his voice tense. That you intend to marry me. She looked up at him, searching his face. Is it true? Of course it's true. I've told you as much, if not in those exact words. He took both her hands in his. But I never meant for him to confront you before we had discussed it fully. There are implications you need to understand, preparations to be made, Nikolai. She stopped his anxious flow of words. Do you truly believe this is possible? That I could be, that the people would accept? Not everyone, not immediately, he admitted. But yes, I believe it's possible. More than possible, if necessary. For me, for the monarchy, for Neova. His grip tightened. Unless you don't want it. If the thought of that life, those duties, is too much to ask, it's not that. She looked down at their joined hands, his with the signet ring that marked his royal status, hers still bearing calluses from grinding herbs and tending plants. I'm afraid of failing you. Of embarrassing you before those who already think me beneath you. Viola. He lifted her chin gently. From the day we met, kneeling in the mud to save a stable boy, you have never been beneath me. In all the ways that matter, you have always been my equal. Perhaps my superior. Tears pricked at her eyes. The court will say you've been bewitched. That I use some healer's potion to cloud your judgment. Let them. He smiled, the same smile that had first transformed his face in her garden. I'll tell them I've been bewitched since the moment you questioned my medical technique and proved me wrong. She laughed despite her tears. I didn't prove you wrong. We were both right in different ways. See? Already speaking like a diplomat. He grew serious again. I won't pretend it will be easy. But nothing worthwhile ever is. The question is, will you take this journey with me? In that moment, looking into his eyes, Viola knew her answer had been formed long ago, perhaps from that first day in the mud, or during their quiet work in the laboratory, or in the snowy mountains where they had finally acknowledged what had grown between them. Yes, she said simply. If you're certain, then yes. His kiss was gentle but filled with promise, of challenges faced together, of a life neither of them had imagined possible, of love that had found its way across boundaries of birth and station. The summer ball had been a tradition of the Neovan court for 3 centuries. Held in the Palace of Mirrors, with its legendary crystal chandeliers and reflecting pools, it marked the formal beginning of the capital's social season. Viola had never attended, of course. The closest she had come was helping her father prepare the special floral arrangements that adorned the grand staircase. This year, she stood at the top of that staircase, trembling slightly in a gown of deep emerald silk, the simplest that the royal dressmaker had been willing to create, but still more luxurious than anything she had ever worn. Princess Katerina, surprisingly, had been the one to help her prepare, after a long private conversation with her brother had apparently changed her perspective. You'll need allies, the princess had said pragmatically as she approved Viola's hair arrangement. I might as well be the first. Besides, anyone who can make my stubborn brother smile like that can't be all bad. Now, as Viola prepared to descend into the ball where the entire court waited, Katerina squeezed her arm reassuringly. Remember, back straight, small steps. And ignore the whispers. By tomorrow, there'll be old news. The grand doors opened. The herald announced Her Royal Highness, Princess Katerina Ivanova, and Miss Viola Fairchild. A ripple of murmurs swept through the assembled nobility as Viola stepped into view. She kept her eyes fixed on the one person who mattered, Nikolai, standing beside the emperor's throne, resplendent in his formal military uniform with its gold braid and medals. The walk across the ballroom seemed endless. Viola was acutely aware of the stares, the whispers behind fans and gloved hands. Lady Helena Markov, beautiful in pale blue silk, watched with thinly veiled contempt. Dr. Sokolov's eyebrows had nearly disappeared into his hairline. But there were friendly faces too. Thomas, the young physician, now officially appointed to the Royal Medical Staff, her father, uncomfortable but proud in new clothes provided by the palace, even Marta, the mountain healer, specially invited for the occasion and looking thoroughly unimpressed by the court finery. When she reached Nikolai, he took her hand and raised it to his lips in a gesture that silenced the room. "You look beautiful," he murmured for her ears alone. The emperor rose slowly, leaning on his cane. His voice, when he spoke, carried surprising strength throughout the hall. Distinguished guests, noble families of Niova, honored visitors from friendly nations. For 300 years, the House of Ivanov has ruled these lands. We have witnessed empires rise and fall, borders shift, and the world transform around us. We have survived because we understand that tradition must be balanced with progress. He gestured to Nikolai and Viola. "Tonight, my grandson, Crown Prince Nikolai, wishes to make an announcement that represents both our respect for tradition and our vision for Niova's future." Nikolai stepped forward, still holding Viola's hand. "Many of you have heard of our medical work in the northern provinces this winter. What began as research between colleagues has become much more. Miss Fairchild has proven herself not only a gifted healer but a woman of extraordinary character, intelligence, and compassion." He turned to face Viola directly. "The old stories say that kings choose queens for lands, for alliances, for wealth. But the greatest kings in our history chose partners who brought wisdom, strength, and new perspective to the throne." Whispers crescendoed around them as realization spread through the court. Lady Helena's fan snapped shut with an audible click. Several older nobles looked as though they might collapse from shock. Nikolai continued, his voice unwavering. "With the blessing of His Imperial Majesty, I ask you, Viola Fairchild, to become my wife, my queen, and my partner in serving Niova and her people." The silence that followed was absolute. Viola was conscious of hundreds of eyes upon her, of judgments being formed and alliances shifting in that suspended moment. But looking at Nikolai, she saw only the man who had knelt beside her in the mud, who had worked tirelessly in mountain villages, who believed that healing and leadership could spring from the same source. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and carrying across the silent hall. "I will stand with you, for Niova and her people." He slipped a ring onto her finger, not an ostentatious royal jewel, but a band of gold set with small emeralds the color of healing herbs. As he leaned down to kiss her, the emperor began to applaud, followed by Princess Katerina, then gradually, hesitantly, by others in the crowd. Not everyone joined the applause. Some faces remained stony, some turned away in obvious disapproval. But as the orchestra began to play and Nikolai led Viola into the first dance, she understood that the battle for acceptance was just beginning, and that they would face it together. "They're already calling you the common queen," he murmured as they moved across the floor. "Then I shall have to show them what common truly means," she replied. "Not low or unworthy, but shared by all. A queen who understands the lives of every subject, from palace to village." Nikolai's smile held pride and a touch of wonder. "I believe you will be the finest queen Niova has ever known." As they danced beneath the crystal chandeliers, Viola caught glimpses of the many faces watching them, some hostile, some curious, some already warming to the unprecedented change unfolding before them. She saw her father wiping away tears, and the emperor nodding with satisfaction, and Marta the mountain healer raising a glass in silent toast. The path ahead would not be easy. There would be resistance to overcome, traditions to honor while creating new ones, a balance to find between who she had been and who she must become. But in Nikolai's arms, with the music surrounding them and a future neither of them could have imagined opening before them, Viola knew with absolute certainty that love had indeed made her a queen, not in title alone, but in the courage to rise beyond the boundaries others had set for her, and in the determination to use that position to heal not just bodies, but the divisions between people. "Are you afraid?" Nikolai whispered as the dance came to an end. Viola looked up at him, at the man who had seen her true worth from the beginning. "Not anymore," she answered, and knew it was the truth.